Welcome to Orange Grove 55.
Well, I can tell you this. We're going to be referencing probably a Hollywood Reporter article that goes into these, diversity officers, right? And especially the chief diversity officer for Disney, LaChandra Newton, but we will get there. But that article does make reference to the fact that what happened in Minneapolis in the summer of 2020, in the very beginning there, and we all know what we're referring to,
Yes.
that was a very big inflection point for the entire industry. Right, and probably for the better, and then probably maybe a little bit over a correction. But hey, you only get the benefit of that through hindsight and some other things. We know that they did rush out Tiana's Bayou adventure quite a bit. Now they tried to say that they have, they had they were working on this. I could tell you right now, there was about one guy on that team who was just looking into feasibility of doing it and just kind of like saying like, hey, wouldn't this be an interesting concept? And before you know it, we have a piece of art that was rushed, and I'll show you why that might have been the case. And everybody gallivanting around, hey, we're going to go ahead and do this. Only a few weeks after what happened in Minneapolis. So we know it was... there may have been some motivation there. Now, there are maybe issues with that, because now that you actually have committed yourself to something without actually kind of going through the details and parsing out what you're actually going to do, you end up sending mixed messages. For example, this is the first piece of concept artwork that they put out there when they announced this attraction. And it's kind of funny because if you read the original Disney Press blog and you see it, they have this artwork kind of multiplied and spread out and stuff like that. And it's like, ooh, this is the big thing. And it's like, okay, clearly you weren't, working on this for quite some time if this is the only thing you actually have to show for it. And they were very vague in the terms that they used and what they were going to actually bring up. But we know it was rushed because, as you see here, Princess Tiana here is depicted in a certain way, right? And it gives a certain expectation of what we might actually see as audiences. Now, if you look at the most recent piece of concept artwork that they've showed for this attraction, you see that they've changed the look drastically of Tiana. And this is kind of what worries me about
styles, though. As the ride progresses, we could see both styles.
We could, and I'm not saying we're not. We absolutely could see that, but from what I understand, it's going to be right after that kiss sequence, which if we follow she is we'll see if they do depict that scene there at the very forefront of the ride, then I will agree with you, we will likely see that. But remember, the impression that they gave at first was that this is the form we'd be seeing her maybe throughout. Mm-hmm. And that's not exactly what's going to be happening here. True. With this. And it's been illustrated to us. And this is kind of what worries me about the story group actually, the Stories Matter initiative, story group, I'm thinking Star Wars. The Stories Matter group actually handling this. Because I think the emphasis that is being placed on this, and they've showed their hand on this a couple of occasions, including with the artwork that you see in front of you, they're placing enhanced emphasis on certain aspects that are very thoughtful of certain particular groups, but maybe don't have necessarily the overall attraction in mind as a cohesive piece of story, as Shay is very he knows a lot about. Now, when they release this piece, they go a lot about her hairstyle and how it's a 1920s flapper style, right? And it should, it stretch the boundaries of black representation in a certain attraction, and how hairstyle is depicted and so forth. Which is great. Don't get me wrong. That's awesome to hear, and I do enjoy that they're going over it with this kind of minute detail. But we still haven't heard very much of this attraction and its substance. And every single time I see the people behind Splash Mountain speak, they talk about everything else but the story, or bringing this IP to life, or showcasing Tiana's story.
They promised at D23. So if nothing's presented at D23, then that's the huge issue problem. They keep promising D23. So.
Oh, I understand. And yeah, I do agree with you. If they don't show anything at D23 Expo, that's going to be something, right? But every single time they talk about this attraction, they talk about everything else other than it, which is quite interesting because I've never seen an attraction like this. I've been covering the Disney company for a long time. I can go through the design and thought process of every single other attraction, and it has never been depicted in this way. And then to actually have their roundtable discussion debuted on YouTube, have the dislikes and likes removed, comments removed. It's all very interesting. And I just kind of wonder, is this really about the attraction? Is this really about the IP? Because I think a lot of people are going to go into this kind of attraction with the expectation of what they saw here. And depicting Tiana's story.
And especially of what ride this is going to replace. Exactly. And I know a lot of people have difference of opinion as, you know, the storyline of Splash Mountain and what it's about and where it originates from. But I think we all can agree it's still a very popular attraction. It's like people are posting online, you know, 90-minute waits, 120-minute wait for Splash Mountain. So apparently it's still doing pretty good. Just the other day, it outbeat the wait time for Seven Dwarfs Mine Train at Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World.
Which is profound because I don't believe Seven Dwarfs Mine Train necessarily reaches the... I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe it reaches the same capacity as Splash Mountain does. So that is interesting. Yeah. It does speak to its popularity.
The thing is, it appears it's going to happen, and it has to get. You have to get to a point where you're just going to accept it, or you're going to become toxic. So, you know.
Except what? I'm sorry.
Except that this is happening, or people are going to become toxic.
Oh no! I don't necessarily disagree with you. I mean, by all indications, it is actually happening.
It's just my thing is because stories matter. I hope that they put on a spectacular. This has to be spectacular.
I agree with that.
The story has to like knock your socks off, so to speak. Where, I mean, it's a water ride, so I hope you already have your socks off. Otherwise, you're going to have a miserable day squashing through the park.
Knock your soggy.
Or if it's a hot day, that might feel good, though.
Yeah. But that it has to deliver.
Yeah.
And,
I agree.
And that's where I'm concerned about it because I want Disney to succeed. We all want Disney to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
We know we don't. And I think it's more so just of a guidance issue because since this is going to happen after that, I believe, Dre, you and I were talking about this earlier, where they're not even going to incorporate any of the music and the songs because it's already past tense of the film. And I was so looking forward to that if they were to have Dr. Facilier in there, again, the antagonist versus the protagonist, that you're reaching the top of that hill and you just get the bum, 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 bum. Are you ready? You know, like that. I mean, I want that. I want to see the shadow creatures going all around right before you take that plunge. To me, that is not even just good storytelling, but you can use awesome technological imagery for that. You can really amp this thing. And I think that they're just so gung-ho on just trying to make this so perfect that it could be to the demise of this attraction where it's not going to settle right with audiences for all those reasons.
And that was my overall point. That's what I was leading to, is that there's a certain expectation with this attraction when it will debut that we're getting the story that we recognize from Princess and the Frog. But they have made that very clear in all of their talks, and I've listened to every single one of them, that is not what is going to be depicted here. That they're actually going to have original songs included that won't necessarily be in origin from the original film. Which now you're creating two sets of expectations. On one side, it's going to be, hey, Princess and the Frog attraction. And the other, it's like, well, kind of. It's after the events of the story that you see there. So a lot of your favorite characters, like Dr. Facilier or I believe Ray the Firefly, right?
Oh yeah.
They won't be represented here.
Hopefully
and it's
they'll
like,
have bits and odes, little nostalgia bits. And
I hope so.
Hopefully, with the music and characters.
I hope so, but I don't. I disagree with the assertion that the assertion that us bringing it up and us, bringing up these issues and attempting to parse out with the very little that they've actually showed us is necessarily toxic.
No, not us. I'm just, in general, just what I'm seeing online and this Twitter. I hate to say it, but there's, I don't have fair numbers, but there just seems to be a constant circle of dwelling on this. And unfortunately, in stages of grief, many have to reach acceptance, because if not, then they, not you guys, but general, will become toxic.
I think I'll just share my thoughts about it, because I think I tick a lot of the boxes that all of you have already talked about. And by the way, I rarely come to conclusions. I like to live in the gray and accept that the gray exists.
Me too.
And just be a part of that, right? So first of all, I think Splash Mountain is a fantastic ride, right? Like, Splash Mountain is an engaging ride. I think that this now it's based off of material which I haven't even seen, by the way, but I've read enough about it to know that it's objectionable and that we should reject it as being good, right? However, the story that exists on that particular ride, removed from its original material, is a pretty intriguing story, because it's about a person who's being bullied, who has to go to the laughing place to avoid trauma, but then ultimately figures out how to overcome these people and turn the tables on the bullies, right? So it's an interesting kind of story about how you need to keep moving, how you need to be able to be cunning, how you need to, the laughing place is good, but it's not going to get you through all of your trauma. You're going to need more than that, probably. Now, am I reading too much into the story of Splash Mountain? Probably, but it's along those lines. Now, setting that aside, I love Princess and the Frog. It is actually one of my favorite animated Disney films. I think it's amazing. I think the fact that it's about entrepreneurship, this is not the traditional princess who just wants to marry somebody who's rich. Tiana is literally saying, I'm the one who's going to make it. This is going to be about me, right? It's going to be about me succeeding in something that I'm trying to accomplish. Not only that, but it is a person of color in an environment where that is not going to be easy for her. That is going to be a hill to climb, right? And I think that the movie showcases that really well. I think that the way that they walk through all of that's really interesting. I think that they don't, Naveen is maybe a guy who's a little bit like wild, and he's not maybe as culture as like, he doesn't have the manners, let's put it that way, or he's not like the etiquette that you might see in the South at that time. But in the end, he's a fun character too, right? And it's this kind of cool love story. So I love Princess and the Frog. So when they announced this, I'm gonna say I actually am a fan of this change, but this comes with a large but in the middle of the statement. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
We'll write a big but.
Exactly, huge.
A big graphic of a big but.
And I want to pick up on what Dre said, because I actually agree with Dre on this point. When the Incredicoaster was updated, I thought to myself, this is going to be cool. There's a lot of cool effects in this Incredicoaster. It used to be a ride that kind of hurt my back because I'm old, and the loop was a lot that was very intense. But now we're going to get a story that goes along with this ride. And I was so disappointed, because the latest Disney story at that time, that Incredicoaster, didn't go back to hearkening to the movies and what they were dealing with in the movies. They said, Jack has escaped and he's running around. There's no emotion related to that, right? There's no deep thing that I have to consider. This is not Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. This is not Snow White about whether or not you should trust people and who people really are, because they may present as one way, but they're actually a very different kind of, to your point, Aaliyah, a toxic person, right? Like, and so these are lessons that we're trying to teach kids. The only thing the Incredicoaster gave me was some kids are wild and they run away. And then it's fine. They're back when I finish the ride.
And then you get a bunch of Jacks on lollipop sticks.
Exactly. Yeah. So I hope that they don't do that, because Dre, I agree with you. If it's just about them finding a trumpet that was lost, that is not the story of Tiana. The story of Tiana is awesome. and they should put that in the
and
ride.
that's where I feel
Agreed.
like that to me is a bigger insult. That to me is a bigger insult to the character.
Yeah.
So it's like that's where they're so gung ho on saying, "Oh, we got to try to stick to inside this bubble." But look at the bigger bubble that you're creating by not expressing the story that is given to you. You got it like on a silver platter. It's handed to you in golden ink. They could do so much with and again, Dre and I have talked about this a lot. The scope of the Splash Mountain attraction, they could put so much in there. That building is huge.
And let me just finish really quick by saying this too, because I totally agree with that statement. And the other thing I wanted to say was, if you take off your fan hat for just a minute, which is hard to do because I'm a huge fan myself, and I know you guys are really good at it because this is why I listen to the podcast, and you guys are fantastic at it. But if you're Disney, you're not making any merch off Song of the South. You're never going to make any merch off, and if you do, you're exploiting people. But if you rebrand this ride to Princess and the Frog, you can sell merch. So this is a huge money-making endeavor for them. They'll throw it at you as, well, we just want to be cautious with culture. And I don't think that that's inappropriate. I don't think that that's wrong. I don't think that that's disingenuous. But just keep in mind, they're going to make a lot more merch money when you get off this ride and you go to buy the Princess Tiana stuff, because you're going to go do that as opposed to Song of the South and Splash Mountain, which I bet you they're not selling a lot of merch out of that. Right. So as much as I care about stories, there's also a business reason for doing this.
Go ahead, Alia.
Oh, I was going to say, okay, then definitely they need to pay attention to the voices such as you guys. And I've been very, like, I guess you could say, not as invested with this change, but I can tell because I don't know, it's just hard for me to explain.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing. There is a side of me. I am very excited to see that. I will admit, when I first heard this, I was like, no, you are not. I was literally going to fly out to Burbank and like picket it at, like, I was just going to be a one-man show in front of the Walt Disney Company arch, just like, no, you're not changing it. Nope. But I have to say, I'm very skeptical on what they're going to do. I hope they do it well. If they do it well and they put a good enough story with some kick-ass technological advancements that can really hone in this show building and really bring the Princess and the Frog and the characters to life, I really wish that they would have stuck to the origin of the story with all the songs, because that's what's going to be relatable to kids. They're going to know these characters by the songs, by the dialogue, where if you continue on where it may come up a little bit stale with the storyline, because you're creating something because you don't want to kind of go out of those boundaries. But if they were to, but still create the Princess and the Frog, I'm good with that. Yeah. And I honestly, I think we all can agree with the some of the issues that the ride itself has been dealing with, a lot of breakdowns and a lot of flooding. And so, I mean, the ride definitely needs to be refurbished. It does need a good maintenance, a lot of TLC. So that's good on that part. I just want to see
the pragmatic reason for this too. And but yeah, we want them to do it right, to do it correctly. It's just, unfortunately, though, because of the likes being, you can't see them, likes down, up, down, comments. There's unfortunately bad actors and groups of downvoters and groups of wanting to be, I'm going to say it, racist, nefarious. That unfortunately that's in place. So yes, I kind of just get concerned when there's people expressing concern, and then maybe they unknowingly will lock arms with such people like that. Whereas it's very important to make clear, no, you guys shut up. What we're just saying is we just want to make sure that this is done right and with quality, and yes, to be respectful to kind of what the Stories Matter group wants to uphold, instead of being so cautious that they're going to mess it up.
I think if you have a Stories Matter group, then we want that to be true. We want the story to matter, meaning that we want Tiana to be an entrepreneur who's struggling, especially in the environment that she's in the film. If it's just about a character losing a trumpet that we need to find and we kind of gallivant around, does that really matter? And that's what we want, right? We want the thing that says Disney is so good at pulling us into a story and saying like, yeah, love matters. Yeah. Anti-bullying matters. Yeah. Being for people as opposed to against people. Being good instead of evil. Those things all matter. And that's what we want from the ride. I think that's what we all would agree with.
I think so. But I'll say this: there may be certain impediments to getting there, and I think it's intrinsic into how the Stories Matter group operates. Unfortunately, they do put a lot of emphasis and energy and effort into this minutia, which does require effort, no question. But it unfortunately it supersedes some other aspects, and we've seen that. Go back and look at all the material that they put out, and very little of it is actually on the story of the attraction, bringing her story to life and going through it in a way that is going to be well received by fans. I again, if you go back into go back into the development of the Ariel attraction, for example. It was always on Ariel herself. It was always on, how Scuttle kind of sets up the whole thing, right? Tells this tale and how they want to bring Ursula to life and all that kind of stuff. It was great. The Stories Matter group going through this attraction specifically haven't focused on any of those aspects once. And it is kind of deeply concerning, because are you attempting to tell a story, or are you attempting to tell a narrative, which is much different? And I think what worries me about this attraction specifically is that there will be a certain expectation here, and I do think that expectation might not be in line with what the final execution of this attraction will actually be. My thing is, to go back to what you were saying, Jay, about Song of the South. What's tricky is that if you were to probably survey every single guest that actually came into Walt Disney World and survey them on what Song of the South actually was, I doubt that maybe less than 1% could actually tell you what Song of the South actually was. Not just have you seen the film, but do you even know what it is at all?
Right.
The idea that we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on something that only a very small proportion of audience members, maybe people who haven't even been to a Disney park, actually have issues with, may set things up in a way going forward where it can get very interesting very, very quickly. As WDW Pro alluded to. For example, and George, go ahead and share my screen once again. This story just came out recently. Disney World surveys ask guests to name, quote, insensitive attractions, hints at changes coming to Disney's Animal Kingdom. And Disney's Animal Kingdom is a really interesting one, because out of all of Disney's properties around the world, I don't think there is another property that includes so much in terms of different cultures, regions, diverse peoples all around the world. So it's a very kind of interesting kind of theme park in that aspect. It makes references on parts of Asia, parts of Africa, and so forth, and that extends out to the Animal Kingdom Lodge and Resort. But it said this. Disney asked guests to assign terms to the current attractions and experiences, from, quote, iconic to boring, Disney clearly wanted to learn more about what guests think of the current lineup of attractions and experiences. Interestingly, Disney also asked the question, or asked guests to note, I should say, if the attraction or experience was, quote, insensitive. From this survey, quote, insensitive was described as perceived as disrespectful to the audience. And you can see how they actually did it right here. It's a checkbox, and guests can check what applies to how they feel towards a specific attraction. It goes from iconic, dated, boring, personal favorite, immersive, or not familiar, none of these. But it first starts out with the insensitive checkbox. And I just think about how many cultures that are actually referenced or represented in Disney's Animal Kingdom, and I go, oh my gosh, like that would be an unbelievably monumental task if attempting to change these things in order to not potentially offend any particular group. And now with Joe Rohde gone, who Joe Rohde was, I mean, this was his park, and anything that was going to be changed in it, anything that was going to be added to it, you got to go through him. Now he's gone from Disney. And so what does that necessarily mean for a place like Disney's Animal Kingdom, which worked extremely hard in order to include and represent so many of these cultures and diverse people to the best extent that they possibly could, and with the most reverence that could possibly be given. This is what we kind of started this conversation out with. But what is the line here? Where do we draw that line? How do we draw that line? And how do we actually go about correcting anything before it?
Because we were actually brainstorming the fact of like, what if they were to go this route, what could they possibly want to change? And we were starting from attractions like with Expedition Everest, because the queue line for that is all about like in the Himalayas, in the Asian culture, you know, the artifacts and what have you. And then you go on this ride and it depicts a mythological creature. Well, is that what they're proclaiming to as being insensitive for some groups and cultures? Then you have just the Asia land itself. You have Africa with Harambe, and where a lot of it is depicted of how it actually looks in Africa. Does that make it sensitive to people walking around saying, oh, I've been to Africa, my family lives in Africa, you know, this is sensitive to me? Is that the approach that they're taking as far as why they're asking this specifically for Animal Kingdom? Because I think, as Dre had put it, Animal Kingdom, I believe, out of all 4 of Walt Disney World parks, has the most world culture and culture diversity implemented within the park grounds itself, as far as utilizing that for attractions and lands go. So is this what they're trying to possibly change, where it just becomes more Disney IP like the other parks? Sorry, Alia, you were going to say something.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say, I think what the data point JPEG's going to look at most is what the majority of the general public, general audience, general tourists that visits Walt Disney World believe. So if the majority of them say something's insensitive, then he's going to pay attention to that the most. I don't think he's going to be, especially with the money involved, to change anything. I don't think he's going to be looking at really any other data point except that one. He's going to feel like there's something to it if the majority of the tourists visiting Walt Disney World feel something's insensitive.
But we already have an example of him doing quite the opposite with Splash Mountain. As relayed before, I could probably survey everybody as far as, have you even heard of Song of the South? And that would be a hard no. And yet we're going to spend upwards of $100 million per attraction to actually overdo it, because a very, very small proportion of guests actually want this to be changed at all.
Well, who knows what's happening behind the scenes? We know Stories Matters Group is weakening. There's signs of that. And also, though, too, he's very much about the amount of money spent. So, I mean, who knows? He may be very much listening to concerns such as what we're presenting, but there's also those factors happening, too.
I think if I were personally Chapek, I would never release a survey like this. And I'll tell you why. Because at what point do you say the percentage of guests who think this is insensitive is high enough it's the question itself is sort of offensive. Like, do I say 5% of people is enough? Do I say 10% of people? Do I have to wait till 20? So I'm cool with offending 19% of the people, but as soon as it's 20% of the people, I'll change it. Like, that's a very, very tough line to walk if you're a decision maker.
Yeah.
So I personally would never release a survey like this. I think you can get better data if you go through the focus group setting and say, like, I'm just going to select like these types of people. I can get a wider range of opinions from people who are actually affected. Because, like, I've never lived in another country. So if you come in and ask me if one of these things was insensitive because of the nationality that the person is, you know, the only thing I can do at that point is troll or give you an opinion that may not even be accurate to anything that you would care about. So it's weird to me to see a survey like this, because I go, I don't know how you can execute this well. Like, it seems like a very lose-lose proposition from my standpoint personally. And I think if you go back to like what you were saying, Dre, in regards to Splash Mountain versus Tiana's Bayou adventure, I think that, to me, that's a little bit easier to sell because you actually have an IP, a Disney IP that is an original Disney. So we're not talking about Marvel. We're not talking about purchased IP. We're talking about an original story that Disney has done, and incorporating that back in, I think, makes a lot of sense. If they said they were going to change Splash Mountain to a Black Widow ride, now I would be like, what are we doing? Like, come on, I don't want a Black Widow ride. You know, like, no, granted, now I'm not saying that based off of the character. I'm saying that based off of the last film, which I just didn't think was very good. The character, I think, is awesome. So you could do a ride. I don't want to suggest that, but I'm just saying I don't want more purchased IP. I would like more original IP. So this one doesn't offend me quite as much, but I do agree with you that playing the game of saying how many people are offended is a dangerous game to play. It'd be better to take an internal group of people like the Stories Matter group and say, we're in charge of telling the best possible stories with the most amount of inclusion we can have, and not just going around. Because if the Stories Matter group said, well, we need to poll people, I would say, then you're not doing your job, actually, because your job is to not poll the general audience, because they're going to give you, I think, garbage information. More people will troll on this survey than will actually express what they're
maybe
really upset about. So I would rather just see Disney kind of not react so much and take the reins and say, this is the area, this is the direction that we're moving in.
But when you have significant investments, like, you know, maybe changing out whole sections of or whole areas of Disney's Animal Kingdom, I would think that you need some data point to actually get to the answer. Now, I do agree with you. Maybe this survey is not the way you go about that at all.
Yeah.
But with the significant cost of investment, I would think you need something in order to say, okay, you know what, this is worth doing. Here we go. Now, you bring up an interesting point as well. What percentages are we working with here? I mean, you know, is 5% accurate? Is it below? Is it above? You know, and now now it gets really, really tricky. Just like with Tiana's Bayou Adventure, though. I mean, you can start to overthink things as well. One of the big reasons why they're going with a new story for the Tiana's Bayou Adventure instead of an established one like what we saw in Princess and the Frog is because when that film originally came out, they got a little bit of criticism where you have the first Black Princess and she's not an actual Black Princess represented. She's a frog for a majority of that film. And I think they wanted to get away from that with what they're doing now here with a brand new story. But again, though, there's going to be certain expectations that go along with that, and that might not be in line with what you know, ultimately the version of the attraction that we actually get. I do agree with you, Ollie. I think with that one specifically, I do agree that Splash Mountain has needed a rework for a long, long time. Ever since they added in the kind of like this fall protection thing. Oh boy, one guy gets injured on Space Mountain, and now we have to completely look at every single other attraction. That's besides the point.
Is that LA law, or not LA, California law you were referring to? That there's a kind of a fall kind of, or people, the whole people mover thing. You can't grab onto it or something.
Yeah, it's not a law. It's kind of like a mandate by OSHA. I believe they found Disney guilty because inadequate fall protection was present, and I believe it was an internal policy to go through all their attractions and ensure that fall protection actually exists. Well, for Splash Mountain, that was really bad because there's just some areas where fall protection can't really feasibly exist. And because it can't exist, maintenance workers are unable to service that attraction up to its full standards and its full needs because there's no way for maintenance workers, between days, right, to properly service that attraction. They literally can't get to the areas of certain lighting rigs and the certain audio animatronics that they need to get access to in order to fully service that. So I'm hoping that Tiana's Bayou Adventure will remedy that problem. I would think that they would, but for that example, I think a more nuanced approach. Splash Mountain, I do think needs an overhaul in some regard, in some capacity, and that's why I was initially kind of excited about what they might be actually doing there, because it might mean that that attraction stays up in tip-top form between refurbishments, as it unfortunately now is not prone to do. So hopefully they remedy that issue and things like that. But it's just when I see surveys like this,
if they don't, shame on them, because that to me is the pragmatic utilitarian reason to do this, is to make sure for maintenance and all that things are more feasible. So
sure, yeah, and I I look forward to see how they might remedy these issues with this attraction. But I just, when I see them go and talk about hairstyles and how they're represented in a theme park attraction, when I see surveys like this, when I hear stories, and I did some investigation on WDW Pro's claim on the list and what it actually involves, and he's quite accurate with that. And one of those things is the Main Street names and so forth. And
that cannot happen. No.
I know but it's like, when I see stuff like that, I'll give you another example of things that we've been seeing manifest itself into the theme park space with Story Matters specifically. There is a show at the American Adventure in Epcot that goes through kind of the American history, if you were. And in the lobby there are these exquisite art pieces that have been there since the park's inception in, I believe, October 1st, 1982?
82.
Right, they have been there for quite a while, 40 years. Recently, some of those exquisite pieces that are museum quality were removed, and in their place were put advertisements for sale. And the reason that was done was to fulfill a certain diversity quota that the Stories Matter group has. So we lost out on exquisite art pieces, things
museum
that
quality
were
level.
Museum quality level, things that were done masterfully, and have replaced them with corporatized product.
That's where it feels to me a lot of the stuff that they're deciding on doing is where it's sugar-coated, bubble-gummed down as a replacement, because it just feels like everything now has to have an IP attached to it. Rather than let something be of what it is, whether it's something that's part of history, whether that's something part of the past. It's like, rather than try to configure it within today's time era so it still can be respectful to everyone around them, it's like, okay, well, let's just remove it and throw an IP there that literally has nothing to do with what this particular attraction or show or ride is about. That's where it feels like Disney is just kind of slacking off at the wheel, so to speak. It's like, I'm just so used to them being so intricate into detail. So again, because they always said it starts with the story. And it's like, and as Jay had mentioned it earlier, it just seems like we want the story to matter. That's why they're called The Story Matters. But when you're using it for a particular matter other than the story, then it contradicts of what you're trying to accomplish.
Becomes something else.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to propose a solution that I think that we would all have loved, right? Because here's the tension. Here's the tension that they created in us. They took museum quality art pieces, which I haven't seen, so I won't even comment on whether or not that was a good decision or a bad decision. But I will say this: they did it in what attraction you said, Trey?
The American Adventure at Epcot.
The American Adventure. So what they were saying is, what exists in terms of America is we don't want to highlight that anymore, maybe. So we're going to bring in another IP to change that, right? The problem with that is that those art pieces were probably fairly accurate to the lived American experience, I'm assuming, right? It wasn't like they put up propaganda necessarily. Maybe it was a little bit propaganda-y, but we'd see. And they replaced that with IP, a specific type of IP. Now, what I would have loved to have instead, and I bet you guys are on the same page as me, and I bet a lot of the listeners are and the viewers are too, but what if we actually they had that giant bandstand, right? What if we'd had a jazz festival and we had said, we're celebrating part of America's history? Because guess what? Jazz music, predominantly invented by the Black community in America, a complete transformation of music. Let's celebrate that by having a jazz festival that takes place in the giant amphitheater. We're going to invite people up. They always have really cool performers that perform at that stage during some of the festivals and things. That's something that I feel like you're not taking away, you're adding. And you're adding a lot of cool flavor. You're adding a lot of cool experiences that we could have, but you're not taking away from what we already have as well. That would have been, to me, a more impactful solution. And it would have been something that I think most people would have gotten behind. I mean, you're not like Alia said, there's always going to be the toxic people who are like, well, I'm not going to go to the jazz thing. Well, okay, fine. Don't have a good time. Like, be a miserable person if you want. But it's when you remove something and replace with something else that it's like, wait a minute, what are you trying to? You can have both messages.
Sure.
But what you sound like you're saying is you're not allowed to have that message. And I think that's where it starts to get dicey. It's where more people start to become uncomfortable.
And to your point, Jay, Disneyland actually recently did have a jazz festival, and it was actually quite delightful. They had a jazz-inspired exhibit going through the history of jazz music and how it, developed in certain parts of America, and they had that at the old ESPN zone area, which was nice to see. It was nice to see how deeply they went into that. Also, too, to kind of put a good side on this. And Jay, and I think you're right. There's a right way to do this, and I think it is to adding to and being kind of consistent with that story. In the Great Moments of Mr. Lincoln over here at Disneyland, they did something similar, but they did it a different way. They actually added a bust of Frederick Douglass in alongside Lincoln.
Yeah.
And it was a remarkable bust, remarkable piece, and there's a plaque there that actually goes into how Frederick Douglass actually helped, inspire Lincoln to do what he ultimately did. Right, he was kind of a person in the ear of Lincoln to attempt him to do certain things in the White House for the benefit of the Black community and so forth. Right, that's awesome. And I thought, okay, that's how you do it right there.
That's how you do it.
Yeah, you bring honestly, up history.
That's
the
common misconception with a lot of people is, and it may not be, there could be the haters out there, the trolls, the people that just like to cause stuff. But then there is a group of people where, such as me, like when I said of how they brought Soul into the American Adventure Pavilion, that doesn't mean I don't like Soul. I actually think that was one of the best Pixar films that was made before we got all this other crap after it. And I'm sorry, Pixar, but it is what it is. I love Soul. So it just doesn't, the way that it's depicted inside the pavilion, that's what I have a problem with. I don't have a problem with Soul. And I'll take it one step further, Jay, that when you mentioned about the, having like a jazz band, why not have different kinds of bands through different eras of the American history? So one night you can have jazz, another night you could have rock and roll. You can pick a time era within the American history, and that could be the overall theme outside or inside of the American Adventure. And as you said, it's adding rather than take away or erase or switch and change, replace, just add to it.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And that's consistent with that story as well.
Yeah, it's consistent with the story as well. That's huge. And I don't want to derail the conversation too much, but just really quickly going back, one of the things I thought of when we were talking about that survey that talked about like, is this insensitive? My first thought was, if I'm being honest, I feel like Joe Rohde immersed himself in the different cultures and put that into the animal kingdom in a way that seems pretty authentic to me. Now, granted,
he absolutely did.
Maybe I'm wrong, but what I was going to say was, when I go to Epcot and I go around the World Showcase, that to me seems like a lot more. What would I say? I don't want to say that it's making fun of the different cultures involved, but it seems like they're more caricatures of the culture as opposed to immersions of the culture. And so to me that brings up the question of like, okay, well, if are we? I mean, I'm just thinking in my head, like, think of Canada, right? Like, Canada is a very stereotypical Canada, and some
Maple
of the
syrup? No.
yeah, exactly, right? I mean, a lot of those areas are sort of caricatures of their real life counterparts, and so it just feels it does feel a little awkward where it's like, well, why are you now applying this to the animal kingdom though? Like, why aren't you applying it? Are you going to apply it to Epcot, or what about Canada could be is different than whatever ride you're at, attraction you're asking about in Animal Kingdom? Like, those are the kind of questions that I think you need to be able to consider at some point in time and go,
Sure.
like, why one way or the other? So this is where the gray area starts to making me uncomfortable, right? There's some things that I go, this makes a lot of sense. Like, actually, I think that we have moved to a place in culture where this is a good change. But there's always those little things where it feels like somebody is. I think that what I tend to say, and by the way, I just did a video yesterday about why you should not write with an agenda in mind. You should write to tell a compelling story, but you should actually test your agendas along the way, right? Make sure that your agendas are realistic. And
I like that. I like that.
But so I think if you write for an agenda, you are aiming for propaganda. And that's the line. That's the line. The line is propaganda. Like, are you doing this because you're like teaching people about a real lived experience? Or are you just trying to get me to change my mind on something by presenting things in a way that actually is not even true to life? It's not even true to life anymore. The American experience, you remove cool artwork and you put in fiction. Right, you put in fiction. Now, there's an argument to be made that the artwork that was in there was fiction. that's a possibility, right? But what I mean is, you put in a cartoon character. What I would have preferred is if you said, we're going to rotate these out with some of the really amazing real life jazz musicians, not the cartoon, like real life jazz musicians. That we're going to rotate these in and out because we want to celebrate a greater lived experience of the American history. I think that would have been more interesting.
And that's consistent with the American Adventure and how it depicts kind of lived experiences throughout America. You know, they have these maquettes of like, people, within that history adding to what is kind of the American tapestry and the different cultures, beliefs, ideologies that really form the American adventure as we all kind of live it. I don't think, to your point, Jay, I don't think Soul is necessarily consistent with that, but adding something, that represents, Black culture like jazz or any of the, other things.
Do civil rights paintings, right?
Well, and I think that's where they're kind of already leaning towards, like what they did with Frozen in the Norway Pavilion, and I think eventually, there was going to be another pavilion when they were supposed to make the animated film Gigantic, and Gigantic fell through, so the pavilion didn't come through. So they're already showing signs where are they going to actually do this with every single country, as you had mentioned, Jay, that if they put an IP attached to everything, I'm not saying subtleties, and I love the Frozen attraction. I love Frozen Ever After in Norway. But if you cripple the notion of having all IPs in every little thing that you do, and this is where it harkens back to Animal Kingdom, are you going to have a park that is so realistic because it's about conservation, it's about protecting the land, helping out the animals, but you're just going to make everything IP? is it going to water down of what makes Animal Kingdom so unique, or what would make World Showcase so unique? Like every country you walk into, oh, there's an IP there, there's an IP there. It's like, I don't mind subtleties, but it's like it even harkens back to the films. It's like everything now is a reboot, a remake. It's like, where is the craftsmanship? Where is the original story? That's what I love, and that's what makes Epcot so unique. You travel the world because you want to see these countries. You want to see the cultures. I loved walking around World Showcase and meeting the people of the countries. You hear them with their accents. You see them in their attire. It's like you really feel like you're actually in that country. Well, you're talking about that you want to be quote unquote sensitive to people. Well, what are you doing when you're knocking out these cultures and countries by diluting it with, I hate to say it, with IP, that unnecessary IP?
Yeah, and it's to your point. I know, Joe, you got to go real fast. So I'll be quick with this, but especially for the reasons where you don't want to offend anybody. Let's just use IP because IP is inoffensive at the outset, right? And it's like, a great example is Animal Kingdom. Actually, Joe Rohde has always been against the idea of adding Zootopia to Disney's Animal Kingdom, because in his mind, it's like, hey, that's really a human story just told with animals, but not really a story of animals about animals as what was the intention behind with Disney's Animal Kingdom. But I can see where now it's like, well, let's just do Zootopia because Zootopia, it's inoffensive. It's just about animals. There's no necessarily representation or instances where representation could be portrayed insensitively or not. It's just an IP. It's animals go. And it's just like that kind of stuff too is like, maybe we should reevaluate that. I understand, hey, I want Zootopia as much as anybody else.
Yeah.
But if we're getting it just because, we don't want to necessarily, run the risk of offending anybody, well, that's something different as well.
Yeah.
Hey, I will knock down anybody to get my hands on a pair of those gazelle antlers. I want a pair of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say this. I do have to take off, and I apologize. I should have done the calculation on the timing a little bit better.
You're fine.
But it's been
No
a
worries.
fantastic conversation, and you guys are all great, and I love talking with you. The thing I will say is this: I do think that there's a flip side to this coin, and I don't want to diminish anyone's lived experience. I do not want. I want everyone to feel comfortable in the parks. I want there to be as much inclusion in the parks as possible. However, I will say this. I also think that we do have a responsibility to really take a deeper look at what we are offended by and whether or not that was intended by Disney. I'll just say this, and this is a funny example. This is not a real example, and there could be a bunch of people in the comments that have really real examples, and I don't want to diminish those by saying this. So I'm going to give all those caveats, but I'm going to say, as a male human being that does not have hair. I am often portrayed. People like me are often represented as villains, right? Like that's almost always who's the villain? It was the bald guy. The bald guy's the villain, right? And I will tell you, exactly, JPEG, exactly. And
to both of you guys.
Yeah, well, and I would tell you that if I felt like I was offended by that, that would likely be because of some insecurities on my part. Some wrestling with who I am and my security as a human. I don't wrestle with those, which is why I used it as a joke. But I do think that there is a responsibility for us not to go, well, we can't offend Jay by having more bald villains. We can't give Thanos hair, redo the CG. Thanos needs hair. Like I don't even want that. And so I do think that we need to look at these stories and this is what the Stories Matter group should do. They should say things like, Are bald men really offended by this, or is that just are we overstepping our bounds and we're getting into territory that they're not offended? It's fine.
Right.
Make Thanos bald. It's great. And I think that somebody needs to do that work because if you find any one person and be like, that person's offended, we better change it. I don't think that that's fair to the stories. I don't think it's fair to the original creators of the stories. I don't think it's fair to Disney as a company. And so I hope that the Stories Matter group will give us more things like jazz festivals that really showcase what the lived human experience was for those artists and things like that, as opposed to saying, well, now I'm gonna put this in quotation marks because they haven't said this, but what if they did? America bad, put soul up, right? America bad, take down names and put up different names. That's where we're getting into a territory where it's like, we can criticize anything across the spectrum of things to criticize. Show me a perfect person. You won't, because they don't exist, right? So like, we got to be careful about how far we go with that. And I think that that's a bigger picture part of this conversation. So I will leave you all with that. And thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to join you
Aloha.
guys.
That's perfect. Oh, and before you go, I know you have to go. Can you just give our listeners and viewers where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. So just check it out right here, down here, at Jay Shearer, SHERER, with the Story Geeks. So go find me on the Story Geeks YouTube channel, the Story Geeks podcast. I'm constantly trying to understand from stories what they're trying to tell us and how the creators went about trying to do that. So that's generally what the channel is all about. We had OG and Dre join me for an episode of Kenobi, which was phenomenal. Really enjoyed those conversations.
Can't wait to do that stuff again.
Oh, yeah. We got to do it again. But in the meantime, I will let you guys go. Thanks for the conversation. Continue this good work. Yeah, absolutely. Take it easy, guys.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.